The snowflakes drifted gently outside the window as Dieter Kleinschmidt sat alone. His wife Helga glanced at the clock. It was 11:15 p.m. She was late, again. She had told him she was meeting her friend Ursula. For the third time in just 2 weeks. Dieter took a sip of red wine. The bitterness lingered not only on his tongue, but also in his heart. 34 years of marriage. 2 grown children. 1 grandchild. And now this. It hadn't hit him all at once. The truth had crept in slowly, like fog rolling over Lake Constance on an autumn morning. The new clothes. The changes in her routine. Her sudden enthusiasm for the gym. The constant smile whenever she looked at her phone. And then, 3 weeks ago, the message he had seen by accident. Her phone had been lying on the kitchen table. "I can't wait to feel you again." It was from someone called M. Dieter, 62, suddenly felt the weight of his years. The wrinkles on his face seemed deeper. The gray in his hair, more noticeable. Was he too old for her now? Had he neglected her? These questions drilled into his mind like rusted nails. Then, he heard the sound of a key in the door. It pulled him out of his thoughts. He quickly picked up a book from the coffee table, pretending to be reading. Still awake. Helga's voice sounded surprised, maybe even a little worried. Her face was flushed, hair slightly messy. She wore the new blue coat she had bought last month. "I couldn't sleep," Dieter said, managing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How was it with Ursula?" "Oh, very nice. We had a lot to talk about. You know how she is." Helga hung up her coat, carefully avoiding his gaze. "I'm going to take a shower." Dieter only nodded and watched her disappear into the bathroom. His eyes drifted to her handbag on the hall table. He fought the urge to look inside. He had already seen enough, heard enough. For weeks, he had been tracking her calls, reading her messages. He had even followed her once. To the apartment of Matthias Berger, a physiotherapist from the gym. 10 years younger than Helga. Divorced. No children. They sometimes met at his place on Bergstrasse. Other times at the Hotel Zerlinde on the edge of town. The sound of the shower echoed through the apartment. Dieter stared through the wall at the photos of their life together. Their wedding in 1989, Helga in a simple white dress, he in a dark suit. The birth of their daughter Julia in 1991. Thomas followed 2 years later. Family vacations on the Mediterranean. Christmas celebrations. Anniversaries. A chronicle of happiness, or at least, what he thought had been happiness. At night, anger would creep in as he lay beside her, listening to her steady breathing. The sleep of the tired, or maybe the guilty. He, on the other hand, lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through different scenarios in his head. Confrontation, divorce, revenge. Sometimes he imagined exposing her and her lover in front of the children, in front of her friends, in front of the whole town, where everyone knew everyone. But what would be left after that? Just broken pieces. No, he had chosen a different path. He would remain silent, but not passive. It started with small things. Little notes he left on her bedside table. "I love you. Thank you for 34 wonderful years." He noticed how she looked at them, with confusion, maybe even guilt. He booked a surprise weekend away, to the small hotel in Dresden where they had spent their honeymoon. During dinner, he told old stories from their past. He watched her smile, uncertainly, but her gaze kept drifting. Back to her phone. "Do you remember," he asked gently, "what you said to me on our 10th wedding anniversary?" He asked her while she was sipping her white wine. "No, what?" she replied. Her voice sounded tense. "You said you couldn't imagine life without me. That we were meant for each other, no matter what happens." Helga swallowed hard. "Yes, of course I remember. I think it was a beautiful day." "You really remember?" he asked, locking eyes with her. She avoided his gaze, nervously fiddling with her napkin. "Of course, Dieter. What a question." She let out a short, artificial laugh. "You've been so distant lately. I sometimes wonder if everything's okay with you." "I'm fine. Really," she said quickly, reaching for his hand. "It's just, menopause and all that. Sometimes I just don't feel like myself." He nodded in understanding and held her hand gently. You can talk to me about anything. There's nothing we can't work through together." That night, she cried in the bathroom. He could hear her soft sobs through the thin door. She was a woman caught between 2 worlds. And while part of him felt oddly satisfied, another part was filled with deep sadness. The weeks passed. Helga continued to see Matthias, but Dieter noticed a change. She seemed more nervous, uneasy. One afternoon, he watched her silently as she stood in front of the family photo in the living room. The picture showed all four of them: Helga, Dieter, their two children, and even their daughter-in-law and grandchild from last Christmas. Helga ran her fingers slowly across the glass, as if she were searching for a feeling from the past. On a rainy Wednesday evening, Dieter invited the children for dinner. Julia came with her husband Stefan and little Max. Thomas showed up alone. His girlfriend Laura was working a hospital shift. Helga had spent the entire day in the kitchen, preparing her specialties: beef rolls with red cabbage and dumplings. For dessert, apple strudel with vanilla sauce. It was a cheerful evening, full of laughter, stories from daily life, and old memories. "Do you remember, Mom, how you always helped me with my homework?" Julia asked, cutting a piece of strudel for Max. "You were so patient, even when I couldn't understand the same math problem for the third time. And how you always defended us when Dad was too strict," Thomas added, grinning. "Mom was always our ally against the evil father." "Evil?" Dieter protested with a smile. "I wasn't that bad." "No." Thomas laughed, raising his wine glass. "But you had very clear ideas about right and wrong." Helga smiled. Her eyes sparkled, though just for a moment. "You were wonderful children," she said softly. "You still are." "To family," Dieter said, lifting his glass. "The most important thing in life." As everyone toasted, Dieter watched Helga closely. Her hand trembled slightly, and for a brief moment, she seemed far away, lost in thought. Somewhere else, with someone else. After the meal, when the children had left, the atmosphere changed as they cleaned up the kitchen. A strange silence lingered between them. "That was a lovely evening," Dieter said finally, placing the last plate into the dishwasher. "Yes, it really was," Helga replied as she wiped the table. Her movements were mechanical, like someone forcing herself to stay present. "Family is the foundation everything else is built on," Dieter said quietly. "When that foundation crumbles, everything else falls apart." Helga froze, holding the cloth in her hand. "Why are you saying that now?" "No reason," he replied calmly, closing the dishwasher. "Tonight just reminded me how important family is to me. Trust, honesty." Dieter, her voice was quiet and strained. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Then she closed it again. "Nothing. I'm just tired." That night, he lay awake again, listening to her restless breathing, the breathing of someone who didn't sleep peacefully. And he felt it, a dark satisfaction, knowing she was suffering, knowing her lies were starting to weigh on her like a heavy stone. Was that cruel? Or was it just his way of claiming his right to the truth? The days dragged on. Weeks passed. And still, Helga continued seeing Matthias. One day, Dieter came home early from work and, by chance, overheard a phone call. "I can't take this anymore," Helga said, her voice low and desperate. "It all just feels so wrong." "No, it's not your fault. It's me," she whispered. "I don't know. I need time to think." She went silent as she realized Dieter was standing in the hallway. She quickly slipped her phone away and forced a smile. "Oh, you're home already. I was just on the phone with Ursula." "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. "You seem tense." "Just work stress, you know how it is." He nodded with understanding. "Why don't we sit down for a bit? Maybe have some tea?" The guilt tugged at her. He could see it in her eyes. Normally full of life, now dull and uncertain. Her movements were hesitant. She flinched when the phone rang, and she stayed close to him. Too close, as if trying to make up for something he was never supposed to know. One Saturday morning in April, during breakfast, Dieter carefully placed an envelope on the table. "What's that?" Helga asked as she poured the coffee. "Open it," he said calmly. With hesitant fingers, she pulled out 2 airline tickets. "To Venice. In May. For our anniversary," he said with a smile. 35 years, Helga. That deserves to be celebrated." Her hands trembled as she placed the tickets back in the envelope. "That's very thoughtful of you. You don't sound thrilled." "Of course I am. It's just surprising." "Well," he said, reaching into his pocket again, I have one more surprise. He pulled out a small jewelry box and opened it. Inside was a gold bracelet with a heart-shaped pendant. Take a closer look, he said, holding it out to her. She lifted the bracelet and saw the engraving on the back of the pendant. Their names and the date of their wedding. Dieter, that's... Her voice cracked. It's a bit cheesy. He let out a soft laugh. After all these years, I think I've earned the right to be cheesy. Tears welled up in her eyes. It's perfect. He fastened the bracelet around her wrist, his fingers lingering a moment longer on her skin. I love you, Helga. I always have. And I always will. No matter what happens. She stared at him, confused. He could see the question in her eyes. Does he know? And if he does, why is he being like this? In the days that followed, she grew more restless. He caught her several times in the garden, phone in hand, looking unsure, hesitating whether to make a call. She started spending more time at home. The supposed meetings with Ursula became fewer. One evening, as a documentary about Venice played on TV, she sat lost in thought, absent-mindedly touching the heart pendant on her bracelet. That's when Dieter decided. It was enough. The game had to end. Helga, he said gently, turning off the TV. I think we need to talk. She froze. Her eyes widened. About us. About you. About Matthias. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like a fish gasping for air. You know? It's been weeks, he said quietly. She tried to stand, but he reached for her hand. Please don't go. Not now. How long? Her voice was barely a whisper. Long enough. I saw the messages. I followed you. I know where he lives. I know when you meet. Oh God, she buried her face in her hands. Why didn't you say anything? Why all the gifts, the plans for Venice? Because I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand what was happening to us. Why you, he swallowed hard. Why you needed someone else. Helga began to cry. Quiet, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. I'm so sorry, Dieter. So deeply sorry. Do you love him? She looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. No. Yes. I don't know. It was never about that. Then what was it about? I wanted to feel young again. Like I still mattered. She wiped her eyes. These past years, you were always busy. With work, your hobbies. Sometimes I felt like you didn't even see me anymore. Dieter nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe I started taking you for granted. But that still doesn't justify what you did. She reached for his hand. No, nothing justifies it. Not really. He looked her directly in the eyes. But I understand. I understand what it feels like to be empty. To feel invisible. What happens now? She asked quietly. Do you want a divorce? The question hung in the air like a weight. Dieter thought of all the nights he had lain awake, running through every possible scenario. The anger, the wish for revenge, the desire to see her suffer. And then he thought of the 34 years before all this. The good years. The children. The memories. No, he said finally. I don't want a divorce. But I want the truth. The whole truth. And so she told him. She told him everything. About the first time she met Matthias at the gym. About how innocent conversations became more personal. About the way he listened. The way he admired her. About how coffee turned into dinner. How friendly touches became something more. She spoke of the guilt. Of the lies. Of how she had tried to justify her actions to herself. I wanted to end it, she said, her voice trembling. For weeks now. But I was scared. Scared he might tell you. Scared of what I had done. Dieter sat in silence, taking it all in. What he felt was pain. Still there, a dull ache in his chest. But alongside it, something else. Relief. Relief that everything was finally out in the open. You have to end it, he said at last. Not for me. For you. For us. If you believe there's still a chance for us. Do you believe that? She asked, her voice trembling. That there could be another chance for us? Dieter stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the last rays of sun painted the sky in warm shades of orange. He thought about all the years behind them, and the ones that maybe, just maybe, were still ahead. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'm willing to find out. In the weeks that followed, they slowly began to talk again. It wasn't easy. There were days when old wounds flared up again, when Dieter was haunted by doubt, and Helga overwhelmed by guilt. They started couples therapy. learned to speak with one another again, to really talk about their fears, desires, and needs. Helga ended the affair with Matthias. She told Dieter about the final conversation in every painful detail. It hurt, but for her, it was also a kind of release. She canceled her gym membership and joined a new sports group with some of her old friends. Instead of Venice, they rented a small holiday home by the Baltic Sea. Just the two of them. For 2 weeks, they walked along the beach. They talked. They were quiet. And slowly, they rediscovered each other. It was like learning to see again, like touching the surface of something new, something fragile. One windy evening, as they sat on the terrace of the holiday home, looking out at the sea, Helga asked quietly, "Why didn't you just confront me when you found out? Why all the psychological games?" Dieter was silent for a moment, letting the question settle. "I wanted you to realize for yourself what you were putting at risk, to make a conscious choice, for or against our marriage." "That was cruel," she whispered. "But I understand. And maybe I deserved it." "It was never about punishment," he said, taking her hand. "It was about whether we still have a future, whether there's still enough love to survive this." "And is there?" she asked softly. He looked at her. This woman he had spent more than half his life with. The mother of his children. His partner. His friend. His lover. He saw the lines around her eyes, shaped by years of laughter and tears. The silver strands in her hair. Hands that had worked so hard and given so much. "Yes," he said. "There is." She had always been there. 1 year later, they finally traveled to Venice. It was no longer the same marriage they had known before. It had changed, become something stronger, maybe even more honest. They had learned that love isn't a guarantee. It's a choice you make again and again, every single morning. As they rode through the canals in a gondola, the soft light of the evening sun danced across the water. The gondolier quietly sang an Italian love song. Dieter took her hand and held it gently. "Do you know what I've learned through all of this?" he asked. "What?" she whispered. "That sometimes silence is necessary, so we can speak better later. Sometimes you have to take a step back to truly see." Helga leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "And that forgiveness," she said, "doesn't mean forgetting, but starting anyway." He nodded and kissed her forehead softly. In the distance, the bells of San Marco rang. A flock of white doves flew across the evening sky. Dieter no longer thought of a perfect new beginning, just one that was real. Not easy, but worth it. And maybe, in the end, that's all we can really ask of life.